What do you get when you take no planning, no budget, and no ideas outside of just being creative and having fun with friends? You get the Filmmaker Diaries. This video is brought to you by SavageStock.net, our brand new royalty-free stock media service that features 8K video, 4K video, and HD, and cinematic music all under one roof, starting at the low price of just $9.99 a month. And shots from the Filmmaker Diaries are actually available as a collection right now. Creative projects can scratch different itches for their creators. Sometimes you have a really important social message you want to get across. Sometimes you want to show off your cinematography skills. Sometimes you don't care about any of that stuff. And that's more or less where we were at with the Filmmaker Diaries.
I think we're all pretty hungover. And then Luke and I were like, let's just start filming like we used to do, where we just get the camera and we just start doing random shots of like you looking out a window, you doing this, that kind of thing.
When we started the Filmmaker Diaries, we were right in the middle of filming The Beacon. So while The Beacon was kind of fulfilling the cinematography side and the social message side, there wasn't a huge emphasis on cinematography and the technical side of filmmaking outside of a few key scenes. And those key scenes are essentially what this tutorial will cover. And the first one in chronological order that I'll want to take a look at is where I forced Pete to have hallucinogenics.
Luke!
Pete, you're doing a great job. Yeah, and Luke's really proud of you. Yeah, we're all really proud of you. I don't even know what the movie's supposed to be about. I think it should be based in reality.
In this one continuous take, Pete walks up to the camera pans around, and he has a conversation with different versions of himself. To pull this off, we used a motorized pan tilt head. I bought this off Amazon.com, and the link is in the description of the video. For this shot, I had the camera going pretty fast, and I had it do a 720-degree view, meaning it started on the original Pete, went all the way around twice, and then ended on him.
Keep going. Okay, and go.
To make this work, we started with the version of Pete that had no shirt on, and the timing had to be just right. He couldn't say his line of dialogue until the camera came back around.
I don't even know what the movie's supposed to be about.
And we had to do it a few times just to make sure everything was working.
Or you're looking down when it gets to you, and then you look up.
Once we did one take, I'd simply return the pan tilt head back to the starting position, and since the speed was the same in all 4 takes, Pete simply put his shirt back on, got into position, and then said his line of dialogue for each character.
Pete, you're doing a great job.
Should be based in reality.
I think it should be based in reality.
While we were filming this, I knew I wouldn't know for sure if it was a success until I got to editing, because pulling this off was going to require heavily on post-production work. I did all the post-production in Adobe After Effects, and the first thing I did was import the first shot. Then I'd just go through it take by take, so I imported the second shot next. And right around the time it started to get to the point where you'd start to see the second character, I would cut the shot and start to bring it in. Now, timing-wise, to get these synced up, I would place the second take on top of the first one in the timeline and set the transfer mode to difference. This is a great way to be able to move this top second shot around and get it so that the timing is synced up, and you can see in the background, when I get it close, you can see the trees and all this stuff will line up and it'll get kind of dark. That means that there's not much difference between the 2 shots. Trees in the background, they're all right on time. So once I had the timing set up, I'd turn the transfer mode back to normal, and I'd draw a mask around the second version of Pete. I'd feather this fairly heavily, and I would animate the mask from when he came into the shot on the right to when he exited the shot on the left. Then I simply did the same thing for the next 2 shots. The third version of Pete, I would add on top, set it to difference, line it up so that the timing is pretty much identical, draw a mask, feather it, Same thing for the next one. Then I would have to repeat the process all over again when it got back around to the first version of Pete, and do that again. So basically I had to do this 8 times. The only thing that was different is I didn't necessarily have to match up the timing, I just had to reanimate the masks. We also shot this on the Tokina 11-16 to give a really wide, trippy effect. Once I was all done with that, I removed the lens distortion with CC lens, and there was a little bit of jitter from using the pan tilt head, so I added pixel motion blur just to give it some nice motion blur. Now for the rest of the sequence, most of the effects came down to grading. And one of the major things I wanted to have happen is I wanted the scene to be very saturated. And so I created a couple LUTs that were specific to this scene, applied those LUTs. And then one thing that I really wanted to have happen was I wanted to have the colors kind of shifting back and forth. So I added an adjustment layer and I put it underneath the LUTs. Then I brought in a selective color effect, and I mostly messed with the yellows. So with the selective color, I changed the yellows to a very strong yellow color. So now what you have is this adjustment layer down here is turning all of the greens into this really yellow color. So to make that alternate, I simply alt-clicked on the opacity stopwatch, and I added a wiggle expression. This made the opacity of the overall yellow color shift every half second by a value of 50. So as the opacity of this yellow color goes out, it brings out the green colors. And you can see over time, this adds a pretty weird effect. I also added a glow effect, and I added a wiggle expression to the glow intensity of that. And then one final thing, I wanted to have the effect of when you see stars, when blood rushes to your head, I wanted to kind of have that effect coming in and out of the image. So I added a solid, and then I went through the creative backgrounds and the animation effects that come stock with Adobe After Effects. And I found one that kind of had the organic look that I was going for. Then I drew just a circular mask, set it to subtract, feathered it quite a bit, and then I did a wiggle keyframe for the mask expansion, and as well as the opacity, just so that this effect kind of creeps in and out of the image from the corners, almost like in a video game when your character's low on health, and they add this sort of like bloodshot eye effect, sort of seeping into the center of the image.
Let's talk about that flipped car scene for a minute. Marika and I were driving out of the city into the country, and as she was looking out the window, she noticed a car off the side of the road in the woods, flipped over, no yellow tape, nobody near it. A very strange situation, but as filmmakers, an opportune one. First thing I did, dial 911. One would think, but I had other ideas. I called Pete. You see, we were developing a little short film called Nick Valley, which involved the scenario sort of like the one we had the chance to film. A character got into a car wreck, and then they were kidnapped when they were knocked out, so it worked perfectly. The funny thing about the real-world scenario is how quickly Pete showed up to the location after I called him. It was almost like he was ready to go. Obviously, for the Filmmaker Diaries, that scene wrote itself, and then we just embellished it and made it even more crazy. Actually getting the car to flip, harder than you might think. We enlisted the services of Pick Apart from Albany, Oregon. They supplied the wrecked car that really had no engine in it. It was pretty much for parts. It was super cheap anyways. We essentially bought the car from them. Then we paid for one of their tow truck drivers to bring the car out, flip it over, and then take it back to the junkyard when we were done. So all in all, as far as planning goes, not that tough. We picked a seldom used country road, alerted the local police ahead of time, and outside of a few farmers slowing down just to see what we were doing, it was a pretty chill situation.
I told him he's probably flipped a bunch of cars, but not this way.
Bought this car?
No, I mean, pretty much had to, I guess, but. Yeah, it's enough room for people to get around. Okay, so. This is, your glass. Well, just get your butt up in there and then do the seatbelt. Is it locked? Okay. Okay.
For cinematography, I really wanted a moving camera with a long lens. We wanted this to feel like a Michael Bay movie. So I enlisted the help of Joe Nanoski, a longtime collaborator and fan of our channel, because he is very, very talented with a glide cam. He doesn't use a gimbal, he uses the traditional old school glide cam. And when you combine that with the GH5 and the lens that has stabilization, we were able to get some amazing shots. The stuff from the scene is on a 100mm lens, which is a 200mm equivalent on the Micro Four Thirds sensor. So that just shows you the skill
of Joe Nanoski, cinematographer.
Check out his channel. For the explosion, I used some assets from Action VFX, who in my opinion have the best explosion and action assets out there. They film them on the Red, they have them in 4K, and they're pretty cheap. I think they're like $10 a shot. So with these stock elements, you're kind of limited on your angle. You're limited on the point of view because it's a 2D element. If you're working with a 3D element, then you could kind of do any shot you want. But when you're working with a 2D stock element, it helps to sell the effect and it helps to make it look better if you kind of match the focal length within reason of the actual stock element that you're getting. We got the assets from Action VFX after we were done filming, and we couldn't just go back and flip over the car and get the perfect angle again. So the only angle that I had to work with was from a drone. Every other angle I had was super close up for the explosion, and it just didn't quite work. I had to upscale the explosions like crazy to make it work. So what I had to do is find a spot in an existing drone shot where the drone more or less stopped, so there was no motion blur. We had the drone in an intelligent flight mode, and so we were rotating around the car almost the entire time. But there was this one section where the drone just stopped for a second, there was no motion blur, and that was my still frame. So the first thing I did is clone stamped out everybody in the shot, and I had to place Marika and I behind the car, and we didn't have a drone shot of us in that location. So what I had to do is go to a different area of that drone shot, cut me out, and then cut Marika out and actually place us behind the car. So, you know, a lot of Photoshop work just to get all the actors in their right position, essentially. Now that's kind of like the stage is set, so next thing I did is just start dropping in elements. For the smoke, I sped up the video a little bit just because I wanted that fast burst of smoke, and this stock element that I had was kind of a slow smoke plume, more for like a big fire. So I sped it up quite a bit and then added some motion blur just so it looked like the smoke was shooting out of the car with the explosion. Then it just kind of came to compositing, adding heat distortion, adding an exposure mask around the car so that when it blows up, the ground around the car gets brighter, and then feathering that out. And then really just a ton of camera shake. And then in the edit, just holding on that shot no longer than I need to, so your eyes can't really focus on any of the shoddy Photoshop work or After Effects work. All in all, I was pretty happy with that visual effects shot, just in that it did what it needed for the story. For the final fight scene on the mountain, we decided to kind of make a day of it and do a hike that we've all wanted to try for a while up on Broken Top Mountain in Central Oregon. The hike itself wasn't too strenuous, but the views that we got at the top were worth anything we put into the hike. Unfortunately, up at that elevation, the wind was just insane. I almost considered not even taking the drone off, and then the fact that we even got any useful drone footage is actually kind of surprising. This entire scene needed to be built from the ground up audio-wise in post-production. It was even hard to hear the reference audio, and we were shouting. We used some foam rubber prop weapons from newrulefx.com. It doesn't look amazing, but it's a pretty cheap and safe solution. There was quite a few people up on the hike, so at times it was a tad embarrassing. Two grown men fighting with rubber weapons, pretty funny. We rented the Panasonic 100 to 400mm Leica lens, and that was to simulate the perspective of looking through a scope on the sniper rifle. We filmed the sniper scene up on this lookout in Central Oregon, and the location was perfect for what we needed. It had depth, you could see a mountain in the background, but one of the issues that we ran into is that the mountain that we were looking at in these shots looked quite a bit different than the mountain we actually filmed the fight scene on. The mountains in the background with the fight scene had snow and there was multiple peaks, and the one in the location that we used here had no snow and it was a single peak. So just to make things a bit more consistent, I had to track these shots. And then I took a reference picture that we got up on the hike and cut the mountains out in the background. And the first thing I did is place those mountains kind of in this scene. Then basically just a little sky replacement work, added some cloud PNG files just using Photoshop brushes. And then with a few of those, I actually added the liquefy tool in After Effects and animated it over time so the clouds actually have a little bit of movement in them. I think that just helps sell the effect overall. The second part of the sniper scene I want to talk about is the effects that I used on her voiceover to sound like it was coming out of a radio.
I see it. You're coming up on the cave now.
I added a high pass filter, some distortion, and then the mastering effect.
I see it. You're coming up on the cave now.
And I actually saved all this into a Premiere Pro preset for you guys. The download link for that file is in the description of this video. Just add that to your presets folder in Premiere Pro, and there you go. You have a decent little preset for getting that radio effect on voiceover. The Filmmaker Diaries wouldn't be possible without the following 4 people, and I want to talk about them individually for a second. Pete Dryden, the best actor among all of us by a long shot, with a natural talent for comedy. A lot of times it was easy for me to just hit record and just let things happen, and that's really something that just can carry a project like this. Do me a favor, check out his awesome photography work, Pete Dryden Photography, on Facebook and Instagram, and also while you're at it, his wife, Jamie Dryden, always helping behind the scenes and pulling off the badass sniper role. Check her out on Instagram as well. Do it. Skylar Rancleve as Jorge. What can I say about Skylar? He is Jorge. Always brings great energy, elevates the mood on location when we're filming with his infectious laughter. Check him out as El Binko on Instagram. And then last but not least, my wife, Marika Neumann. This entire video and all other BTS videos on our channel would not be possible if she wasn't filming them. And on the Filmmaker Diaries, anytime you see me on camera, she's the one behind the red. Truly the unsung hero of this entire project and the BTS. And that's more or less all I want to talk about for the Filmmaker Diaries. We enjoyed shooting every minute of it, and hopefully you guys learned a few new things with this BTS tutorial. Until next time, I'm Luke Neumann with SavageStock.net.